Trump is saying that BRICS is trying to collapse the US dollar. And the Kremlin responds that their association have never targeted third countries or their currency. Before we can talk about the current situation and its impact, you have to understand how the US dollar became the most used currency in the world. So the modern form of the US dollar was born after the Federal Reserve was founded in 1913. Back then, a majority of developed countries pegged their currency to gold as a way to stabilize currency exchange. However, when World War I broke out in 1914, many countries had to abandon the gold standard. Because in times of war, countries find themselves confronted with rising costs and bills that need to be paid. And the reality was, for many countries, this wasn't possible with the gold standard, so they abandoned it and paid their bills with paper money. This of course has devalued a lot of currencies. And for more than 200 years, right up until that point, the British pound was the world's leading currency. So whilst every country was abandoning the gold standard, Britain held on to it because they didn't want to lose their leading position. Ironically, only after 3 years into war, Britain had no money, so they needed to take a loan and borrow some. And still they tried to stick to the gold standard until 1931. But then they also came to the conclusion that the gold standard was no more bearable and that they also had to abandon it. And that's exactly how the US dollar took over the world as the leading currency. From that point on until World War II, the US was the primary supplier for other countries in terms of weaponry. And most of the countries were paying in gold, making the US the global leading owner of that precious metal. So what resulted from that was many countries depleted their gold reserves, so there was no coming back to the gold standard. So the world had a problem and needed a solution, and that's when 44 countries from all over the world came together in Bretton Woods. It's a place in New Hampshire. And the goal was clear, it was to develop a system to manage foreign exchanges that would not disadvantage any country. And they came up with a decision that lasted almost for 50 years. They decided that no currency will be linked to gold anymore except for the US dollar, and all the other currencies will be linked to the dollar instead to gold. And that system lasted until 1971, where President Nixon abandoned also the gold standard, but it had a reason. So according to the Bretton Woods system that was agreed on, every country that had US dollar reserves could trade in for gold. And the agreed rate was $31 equals 1 ounce of gold. And just as France wanted to use this term of the contract, the US found themselves with no gold reserves that were sufficient enough. So although from 44 countries it was only France asking for a trade-in of the dollars, the United States came to the realization that they had printed too much money and couldn't fund it with their gold reserves. So the result was clear, delinking the US dollar from the gold standard. And as I said before, every currency that decided to delink from gold have been devalued. And just as the US dollar was devaluing also, the oil crisis broke out. And for many analysts, that's the exact point where the power of the modern dollar was born. So what happened was, on 6 October 1973, Syria, Egypt and Israel go into war. The United States, as a strong ally, supported Israel. And that led to a reaction of the Islamic nations. So the OPEC countries, which stands for Organizational Petrol Exporting Countries, decided that they would ban the US from their oil exports. What happened next was clear. The price of oil skyrocketed as supply decreased, demand increased. The US, known for its geopolitical finesse, made the biggest deal in their history. They agreed with Saudi Arabia on the so-called petrodollar. The United States had just one requirement on the table, and that was that all of their exports of Saudi Arabian oil must be done in US dollar. In return, Saudi Arabia would get anything they asked for, from military support to infrastructural help, plus an assurance that with their sales in USD, they could buy treasury bonds from the government. That's also known as petrodollar recycling. And that way the US got interest-free credit from around the world that they could invest again in their own economy. And the Saudis at the end of the day had all the privileges listed above. This deal is known as one of the most intelligent geopolitical deals that has ever been closed. And now we are coming to the current situation. 50 years after the agreement was born between Saudi Arabia and the United States, the petrodollar was gone because Saudi Arabia didn't want to extend the deal. Their stance was heavily influenced by rumors that said many countries want to ditch the US dollar. Let's check if that's true. So first things first, the US dollar still accounts for 88% of all global exchange transactions and 58% of global foreign exchange reserves and still 54% of global trade. To be quite honest with you, these are impressive numbers. So the US still has the power to strike countries with tariffs that lead to major economic consequences. But in return, countries like Russia and China, who've also once been in focus of US sanctions, have now found ways to ditch the dollar. For example, today, trade deals between Russia and China are either done in Russian rubles or the Chinese yuan. But what about Saudi Arabia? Although the deal expired, still Saudi Arabia relies on the dollar a lot. But something new entered the market. It's called the petro yuan. And to be quite honest with you, that's challenging the norm. Plus, Saudi Arabia as of 2025 joined a project called mBridge. And that was the first time in history a major oil nation joined a project that's designed to ditch the dollar. So the same country that was responsible for the US dollar's success since the 70s was now joining a project which is supporting the Chinese yuan. Matter of fact, that project mBridge doesn't support only one currency. It supports all cross-border transactions. It was led until 2024 by the Bank for International Settlement, which is owned by 63 different central banks. There are also rumors that the project supports the currency Ripple. It's a cryptocurrency in the market. So that means that the newest technological advancements should be used in the new cross-border payment system. And as of 2024, the Bank for International Settlement announced that the project has matured enough so that every country could pursue their own project. And that's potentially a risk because every country could work on their own project without Western influence. And to be quite honest with you here, the petro yuan is not only used by Saudi Arabia, it's also used by Russia, Iran, China itself, UAE and Egypt. And those mentioned countries are also associated with the consortium called BRICS. They were first called BRIC back in 2009 because Brazil, Russia, India and China were the founding nations, and in 2010 South Africa joined, so that's why it's called BRICS now. What BRICS is currently working on is publicly stated on their homepage. It's called BRICS Pay. It's basically their own payment system. And their scope is to pay more in local currencies and to make use of technological advancements like blockchain. And under blockchain, you can also understand cryptocurrency. If you now look at the similarities between the project mBridge and BRICS Pay, you can see actually a lot. Some of the spectators are even speculating if those two projects have potential interfaces. Because just beside the similarities in scope of these two projects, the participants are also nearly the same. According to several resources, the BRICS Pay system currently supports 185 countries, whilst 40 countries are already using the system. Just imagine the scale of it. Let's take for example China. China, who imported $134.2 billion worth in iron ore, who has a share of 75% only in that sector, is now ditching the US dollar and betting on the Chinese yuan. And that's not only a rumor anymore, they've already done it with their deals with Brazil and Australia. Here, the US dollar is no more of use, it's only the Chinese yuan. And this doesn't leave the value of the US dollar untouched. As you can see in the global dollar reserves, they have been eroding from 70% to 58% in 2025. Because China has understood one simple thing: besides doing politics and joining consortia, they have to back up gold. So they are trying to build trust in their currency. And now you will ask, why should they stack up gold? What does that mean? Well, what this basically means is they are trying to build up trust for their currency. as it was back in the day. Of course, the United States have had for many years the highest amounts of gold reserves in Fort Knox. But to be honest here, China is catching up in an unseen pace. You can see the vast development of gold reserves in China over here. So from 2016 they had 1,800 tons in gold, and as of 2025 it's 2,300 tons. And in the mainstream media, unfortunately, only China is discussed for stacking up gold, but it's not only them, it's also the other BRICS nations. So what can happen in the worst case scenario for the United States over the next decades? The US dollar gets more devalued over time, which can lead to higher interest rates. And higher interest rates could lead to a destabilized national budget. The consequences of that are rising costs for living, like housing, transportation. As of November 2025, the US national debt has rose above $38 trillion. During the times where the US dollar is still in its leading position, although the number is unimaginably high in terms of debt, still, because the US has the leading position, it's not in danger. But if the dollar weakens further, it could unleash a chain reaction. Investors will then buy less US bonds. And then the US needs to pay higher interest rates, which leads to chaos. Because in order to do that, the Fed has to raise the interest rates. And that leads to inflation, and we all know what this means. Basically, you are seeing less investments in the market, because people and companies are more cautious. But when there is no investment, then there will be also less job opportunities. So at the end of the day, the more the dollar devalues, the system starts shaking more and more. From my point of view, it doesn't feel like a sudden crash, but it feels like a devaluation over time. I compare this to a snow mountain where it's building up an avalanche, where you never know when it breaks, but when it does... So if we take a look at the whole picture, yes, I would say the dollar is under attack. Not because other countries want to hurt the US, they want to protect their own economy. And it's basically, from my point of view, the first time in the last 100 years where we have a market that does not blindly accept the US dollar. Those participants in the market want to have a diversified portfolio because they don't want to see themselves confronted with sanctions where their own economy just gets doomed. So the main goal here is to reduce dependency and to increase sovereignty. And yeah, still the dollar, as said, sits on a solid foundation. 58% of the global exchange reserves are in dollars. And that's, as said, just more than impressive. But to be quite frank here, I think that's the buffer the United States has built over the last years of economic success. And from my point of view, this position is far from being lost to just because new participants have entered the market, because new alliances are forming or new projects are being made. That's normal, because at the end of the day, all the new participants, all the projects have to prove themselves in front of the world, which the US dollar already did. So at the end of the day, what does really change for me, if you ask? Well, not that much, because I don't like to panic. I still look after a diversified portfolio, I still invest in the S&P 500, but if I now have to trade with currencies, then I'm also looking into alternatives like the Chinese yuan. But to be quite transparent and open with you here, I don't look into the currency world and into the currency projects as much. I love to look in the cryptocurrency world, as I focus on finding projects that deliver a real world value. And in the cryptocurrency world, my focus is not the next meme coin or the next gold rush over there. I just look for projects that deliver a real world value and solve use cases. If you want to see a video on projects in the crypto world which have a use case and solve real world problems, let me know in the comment section down below. I will be happy to cover that. And tell me, what's your take on this whole dollar situation? Do you think it will devalue more? Do you think it does even matter? How does it affect your investment strategy? Thanks for watching. As always, see you in the next one.